Okay, yeah, I guess I might as well just get started. My name is Anthony Ha. We are doing the panel that is sort of the flip side of that other panel, which is basically sort of from, if you're a startup, media startup, how do you raise money? Although it's a little bit blurry because actually two of our panelists are sort of on the investor side as well, kind of. So basically, you shouldn't believe anything they tell you. Yeah, just to start out, maybe just as an introduction, maybe just tell us what you do, and in the case of your startup, what you can say about how much money you've raised, so we should know how seriously to take your advice.
Hello, hi, bonjour. My name is Thomas Gayno, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Core Project Inc. Core Project Inc. is a really young company. It was founded last year. We do short voice messaging, and we raised $1.8 million last year. I wished it was last week. It was last year. And that's about it for now.
My name is Aniq Rahman. I'm the president of a company called Moat. We're an online advertising, analytics, and intelligence company. We're an enterprise software SaaS business that happens to work with many major media companies, including brands and publishers. And then I'm also an angel investor and also a partner in a venture capital fund called Vast Ventures in New York.
My name is Neal Shenoy. I'm a founding partner at a company called 212 Media, which is a venture development platform. So we build ventures and partnerships with big media companies and then end up both funding and operating those companies. So it's almost like an operating capitalist model. So we have 4 ventures collectively between 212 Media, which is an operating company, and the 4 ventures we've raised to date about $125 million. Although every good company is in the middle of a raise, we're in the middle of raising 3 more rounds across our companies that should double that capitalization to about 250.
And I guess I didn't mention, Moat has raised $17.5 million to date.
So Neal, just to sort of flesh that out a little bit, I know, so you're within 212, you're actually sort of focused on most of your time is actually now spent on one of those companies, right?
That's right. So just as a quick case study, the first business that we started is a company called Savin. Savin is basically Spotify for India. It's the largest music streaming service in the world for Indian music. And the story behind that was that we had this vision of digitization in India. We compared that with music, film, and television models in the US. We found backing from Time Warner as an initial sort of seed partner, not seed investor, but seed partner in the business. And today, that venture is the #1 streaming service in India. We've raised, as of this last round, about $75 million of capital. And investors include Bertelsmann, Tiger, Liberty Media, 212 Media as well. But the business that I operate, which is the third business chronologically, which is what I'm most passionate about, is in early childhood literacy. It's a company called Speakaboos. And in that business, we've raised $12 million of capital. We're in the process of closing a B1 for hopefully 10, knock on wood. And so had a hand in creating all 4 of the businesses, but focus my time day in and day out on the one that I find the most interesting, which is the one in education.
So I'm going to let these other guys talk in a second, but I did want to ask one more question, which is why is it that in 212 Media there are like brackets around the 212?
So it's a closest. So we started in 2006, which was obviously post-bubble and starting to see the emergence of the alley. And we're super proud of being New Yorkers. I've been in New York since graduating from college. And we very much wanted to have the same innovation as Silicon Valley, but with a little bit more of an industry focus. So 212 is meant to align with the area code for New York, which you can't get a 212 number anyway. But we put brackets around it to sort of denote the fact that it's sort of a phone number. So when we were first starting off, actually, people would actually try to dial 212 Media to try to get us. Ultimately, that's not 7 digits, so it didn't work out. But.
You should have tried to, I don't know how you pull that off. So I think maybe let's talk a couple about just like a couple headline-y type of things. Just I'm a reporter and I like to ask about that. Certainly when we talk about media fundraising, I started tech blogging in 2008, and that was when every company was desperate to say that they were not a media company. You're like, we are not a media company. We are a platform for and then you're like, but okay, but it sounds like you're basically a media company. I guess especially when I say media, I mean a content company specifically. And now it seems like the tables have turned very, very much that BuzzFeed is raising crazy amounts of money, Vice is raising crazy amounts of money. Do you guys think that's a good thing? I mean, for those companies, for the ecosystem in general?
I think it's a great thing. But Vice and BuzzFeed are both customers of Moat. So,
So it's a great thing for you.
yeah, the more money they raise, the more they can pay us and all that sort of stuff. So that's great. But no, generally I feel like BuzzFeed, we're already seeing tons of great entrepreneurs come in and out of BuzzFeed. That is, they've been acquiring companies, they've been developing a lot of great talent. Same with Vice. Vice is actually the overnight success story that took 20 years to happen, probably. It started in the 90s, and then BuzzFeed's the overnight success story that took 7 years, I think, or 8 years to develop. So these are proud New York companies. I mean, Vice is out of Williamsburg, which is awesome. And I think that, generally speaking, they're very unique companies. So BuzzFeed, for example, they really pioneered the native advertising model, sponsored content, and they're raising a lot of money because they're generating a lot of revenue. They're making hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue every year globally. Vice is also a little bit different than most traditional tech companies in the sense that much of the money that they've raised is going towards television development. And so I also think that these are great headlines for the press to report on, obviously, but if you're a young entrepreneur starting out in media, it's also important to sort of understand the comps around it. You know, these are companies that are probably a little bit different in terms of like the way that they're being valued, because they're being valued around certain, you know, the revenue. They're being valued around where they're seeing their growth and programs.
Well, maybe to sort of then apply it a little bit more to the topic, or to make it a little bit more practical, is, I mean, do you feel like the fact that there are at least a few of these big headline companies that are raising a lot of money, does that sort of, you know, trickle down and affect the prospects for, you know, a media startup sort of first, you know, just coming out of the gate, and does it make it easier for or harder for them in some way, or are they just completely separate worlds?
Totally. I mean, I think that New York has had several great media success stories. You look at Huffington Post being acquired by AOL. I was an investor in a company called Elite Daily, which was acquired by Daily Mail. Vox Media is out of here, and I think that in some ways it's a rising tide, and all these ships are everything's good in the media world. It's encouraging a lot of other entrepreneurs to. I mean, I think the other thing is the barriers to entry in creating media, creating content, have never been lower. You don't necessarily have to have a huge newsroom. You can serve on WordPress. You don't need to really develop technology core competency anymore. But what it's leading to is a lot of innovative business models, like around digital video, native content, et cetera.
And I would add that I think it has actually, the successes of all those media companies in New York it has had some implications on non-media companies as well. Like the fact is that the New York tech scene has dramatically increased in importance since the successes that you just mentioned. And to a certain extent, Tumblr is also a great media company, and it has created or inspired many other entrepreneurs as well that are not necessarily in the media industry.
So one more question on this topic, and I guess the other sort of headline I wanted to ask about, which I think, and I guess this, you know, maybe to what you were alluding to, Aniq, is that people, you know, when there's a happy story, everything's great, and then, you know, when there's sort of a sad story, it's like, oh, it's terrible, we're all screwed, and like that was, I felt like, at least in the circle of people I follow on Twitter, that was true when GigaOM shut down. And I think there are a lot of specifics to that case that, I mean, wouldn't even claim to have particular insight into, but I think that one of the things people talked about was this idea that, oh yeah, these were guys who really bought into this dream that they could raise a ton of money. I mean, not as much as like BuzzFeed, but, you know, in the more than, I think it was like 20 million, more than 10 certainly. And there, you know, there's certainly, I think, some questions about whether or not they were trying to build something that was just bigger than really what you were going to build with a technology blog. Is that, I mean, a risk that you think people should be worried about, or?
I think you have to be, I think this is true of all startups, right? You have to have a really clear sense of the amount of capitalization you take in relative to the maturity and the milestones of that business. And so you can't, depending on the type of business that you are, if you're measured by revenue, you obviously cannot let your revenue get too far out of whack with your cost structure. It becomes impossible to raise the next round. If you're based on audience, is your audience growing, and are companies with similar audience being funded? And I think in the case of GigaOM, and I don't have any particular insight into that specific business aside from admiring it, is that they had a wonderful purist model for content and had a really wonderful vision, but maybe the amount of capitalization and thus the amount of burn was slightly out of whack with the fruition of that vision. So maybe with more capital or more time, it would have gotten there. But it was a pioneering company of sorts, and sometimes pioneers get arrows in their back, right? So
it's a sad image.
Yeah, I would just add to that in the sense that GigaOM, I think, was started by Malik, and he really built that business by himself, and I think maybe with a couple of partners, but hence the eponymous name. But I think that a lot of entrepreneurs also get caught up in the rat race of going out and talking to VCs and raising money, whereas GigaOM, maybe if they didn't raise money, they wouldn't have tried to grow so fast, and maybe we would have still been around today. Maybe they would have just been a bootstrapped lifestyle business or revenue generating business that sustained itself.
Right, because I do think people sometimes bring up, TechCrunch, and this was all long before I got on, so I can't take credit for any of this, but that it was, a bootstrapped company, and that I think allowed it to sort of be flexible kind of in terms of its outcome. Although I guess then it just went with the traditional outcome, getting acquired by a big company. So I think, changing topics a bit, I think when people come to a fundraising panel, one of the things they really want, usable insights, and we'll get to that, but they also want horror stories. So I guess maybe we'll go down and just what is the and you can flavor this as much with personal anecdotes as you want. What has the biggest challenge been for each of you in terms of raising funding? We'll start with Thomas.
So the baby here, as you could hear, we just raised a very small amount, and we did only one round, and it was only my first round in my entire life. So I'm a young entrepreneur and first-time entrepreneur.
How did you celebrate raising that round?
With a huge bottle of rosé.
that sounds pretty good.
It was actually in June. I was confused on the date earlier, but it was in June last year. So I think I was surprised by the intensity. Everybody says that you have to be, when you're raising, you have to be trying to create your own pace and your own rhythm and try to be the one leading. And my goal was to have as many meetings as possible and regroup them as much as possible to create some sort of a competition basically between your investors. And we took 65 meetings in 3 weeks.
Wow.
That was honestly the most intense period of my young life.
So and during that period of time, was it that basically you were taking all of this on yourself and you just sort of told the rest of the team, keep working on the product? Or was there a team at this point? At this point, it was just you and your co-founder.
Yes. It's important to mention that none of us are technical co-founders. We are both from a creative background, creative/business background. So we basically built a beautiful deck. We got an early prototype that we made with a friend, and we had a video showing our vision for the next 18 months, basically what we wanted to build. And we went around, started in New York. We did 1 week in New York, 1 week in SF, another week in New York with meetings with Europe, basically. It's something I can speak a little more later, but we really wanted to raise capital in different parts of the world. And being from France, I had connections in Europe, and I really wanted to do that too. So we took all of our meetings together, the two of us. We had that connection going on since our early days at Google. So we kept that.
All right. So and then Aniq, what for you? What was the biggest challenge?
I've been an entrepreneur since I was in college. I started my first companies when I was an undergrad in university. So early on, I guess I didn't even know what a venture capitalist was or what angel investors were because I was just sort of in my own little bubble. And so my first two businesses were totally bootstrapped. I didn't raise any capital. My third company was a company called Instinctive, which was acquired by SoundCloud a couple years ago. I feel like then I was exposed to venture capitalists for the first time and really understanding, setting a board up and talking to other venture capitalists and raising further rounds. And I think that generally speaking, and with Moat, we've had a really incredible experience. We've raised 3 rounds of capital now. The first round was just my co-founders putting their own capital in. And then we raised a friends and family Series A round and $13 million Series B a few years ago. and they've all been very different processes. So I think that at the early stage, in the seed stages especially, there's a lot of capital, and a lot of people are willing to write checks. You can sort of find a lot of people that are willing to write 25K, 50K, 100K, even 500K checks. I think towards the later stages, you start getting a little bit more restricted in the sense that if you're trying to raise a $50 million round, there aren't that many people with checkbooks that big. And those checkbooks are also generally a bit more conservative. So when you're early, you can go raise from a PowerPoint and a video demo. But once you're asking someone for $50 million, you have to have customers, traction.
Which seems fair.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems fair.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure some people have raised 50 million with PowerPoints, but generally not recommended for either party, really. But I would say that spending time getting to know your investors is really important, because I've experienced both bad boards or boards that made my life really difficult, and really phenomenal boards and phenomenal investors. I think that just getting to know your investors, getting to know the market, getting references on people, and also when you're out fundraising, you can end up spending a ton of time. He was very efficient in his process, a couple of weeks meeting a bunch of investors. I think that spending time understanding the key metrics and finding the right investor targets too. So for example, if you're out calling on investors that have never invested in a media company before and you're running a content company, you're probably going to spend a lot of time at best educating them, and maybe you'll get them to invest. But you really want someone that has high conviction, someone that actually can help accelerate your business. Ideally someone that's invested in other media companies. They know all the strategics that could potentially acquire your company. They know all the strategic investors that could potentially invest in future rounds. And so really just having that expertise around the table, I think, is really important.
So Neal, I do want to get to your answer in a second, but just to dig into that a little bit. So you talked about the importance of finding the right investors, and you've been on good boards and bad boards. What was sort of like, what was it? I mean, what was it like being on when the board is not helpful, and when you look back, are there things where you said, oh, that was like, I should have realized at the start that was how that was going to go?
Yeah, and I mean, like, I don't want to say.
I mean, if you want to give us their names, and their phone numbers.
Yeah, there's certain people that. Well, anyways.
File the serial numbers off.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus or say anything negative about anyone in particular, but I feel like just my own naivete in the past may have been around. Certain investors maybe just need a lot of education. They're not the most sophisticated venture investors, so you have to really explain to them what you're doing from a technical perspective, from a product perspective. They may not even be end users of your product, and so you have to really explain what you're doing to the nth degree. And that takes up a lot of time. When you're running a company, you're probably spending 80 hours a week trying to build your product, trying to hire people, trying to get customers and develop customers. And if you're going to add investors to that mix, there's really no time to do anything else. So finding investors that are ultimately incredibly supportive and just really get your business and can be accretive to value, I think is really important from the onset. Otherwise, you could end up just wasting a lot of time and burning a lot of cycles and taking away from other parts of your life, including your own personal life, which I think you should also think about as you're starting a company.
Yeah, so Neal, I mean, I think that this process was different for you because the early stages, specifically with Speakaboo, it's sort of, the money was coming from 212, and it's only with the A and the B specifically that you had to start going out and finding investment, right? Do you think that made your life easier, or are there ways in which it sort of changed the conversation when you're going out for those not later stage, but not early stage investments?
Yeah, that's a great question. We did have a different experience, but in many ways a very similar experience to every other entrepreneur or any other venture raising money. So just to sort of make that more pragmatic and applicable. So I want to echo something that Aniq and Anthony said, which is that raising capital for the most part is a means. It's not an end. It is wonderful to get an article in TechCrunch having closed a $100 million round, but I admire the companies and the entrepreneurs that are able to have success with the least amount of capital possible, because that, in my mind, is true success. If you could be the company that bootstrapped, raised sub $5 million, had a nice exit, where the entrepreneur made money and investors made money, I admire that a lot more than a company that raised $200 million and had a comparable, quote unquote, return on capital. Because I think it's harder to do, and you have to be so effective and efficient with regards to execution. So, it is nice to be celebrated for raising money. We will have probably $250 million of capital into the 212 Media businesses when all is said and done this year. I don't think that is a badge of merit, to be honest, number one. It just happens to be a reality of our businesses being very media-driven businesses. I'll start with that. But to speak to the specific challenges that we had, so we had a challenge early on in 2005 when we were starting 212 Media. There was no concept of whatever you want to call it, venture development, venture studio. This was even pre-successes of companies like Y Combinator and BetaWorks. So there was not going to be an institutional investor that understood the 212 Media model or wanted to invest in someone else's quote-unquote portfolio. So what we did, which was really interesting and really saved us in the years to come, is it forced us to go out there and raise capital from highly unlikely sources, and that was very deep-pocketed, very sophisticated international family office investors. So when you look at 212 Media, our investors are non-quote-unquote traditional VCs. They are highly, again, affluent, operating executives and families of major companies throughout the world. And that saved us in two ways, because when things started hitting the fan in 2007 and 2008 and to some degree 2009, and the capital markets were shut down, that was a huge pipeline of capital for us to be able to tap into. And as our company started to grow and become more international, they were boots on the ground, so to speak, to be able to help us get into markets like India, like the Middle East as well. So lesson there is that, again, it's coupled with the first point, raising money is a means, not an end, and having to raise venture money may not be the path for you. It may be that you raise money from friends and family, and that's good enough. Or it may be that you raise money from private investors or national family offices, and that's good enough. And you don't have a Sequoia in your round, but that's okay. Certain businesses require that, other businesses don't. Both entrepreneurs could be absolutely successful. So now finally with this one cautionary tale, we've had every single imaginable success and failure from a capital raising perspective. It has taken years off of our life, I promise you. But the one thing that we learned throughout that experience is that as an entrepreneur, you have to control the things that you control. And think about the capital raising process as a very simple equation. There's a wide mouth of the funnel, which is how many leads do you ultimately have? What's your pipeline? Which you did an exceptional job of. 65 people in 3 weeks is phenomenal. There is your conversion rate of how much you can get people to convert, and there is the timeline. Those are three things that you control. So you control how many people you can qualify, you control how intense of a period you can have of capital raising, both because it's effective, but also because it's a distraction otherwise. And the thing that you also control is your materials, your pitch, and your storytelling. If you get all of those three things right, you have this process. A very short period of time, a large funnel, and a great conversion rate. But if you get even a couple of those things right, you could be successful. You could have a huge pipeline, not really have a great pitch, but the law of numbers leads to conversion. Or you can have a small pipeline, but be so damn good at telling your story and positioning that you get a very high conversion rate. Ideally, you want all three. A large number, a high conversion rate, and ultimately a very compact period of time. And you can architect that. So you can know that going into the process, so there's no illusions, and you're walking into that process very wide-eyed.
So I want to open it up to audience questions in just a second, but before let me ask sort of one more question, which is, so Tomas, you talked about sort of flying back and forth between New York and San Francisco, and I'm curious, both for you and for any of the other panelists, how much when you are fundraising should you try to, if you're in New York, should you try to focus on New York investors versus obviously Sand Hill Road, and then, or just completely out, neither, and in your case, like in Europe?
So first, I wanted to make something clear, because I said we took 65 meetings, but I would not. These were only 20 different investors. I would not advise taking meetings with 65 different investors in 3 weeks. That would probably give a pretty bad signal. So yeah, only 20 different people, and we had several meetings, several rounds of meetings with these people. As for going back and forth between New York, SF, and Europe, being a first-time entrepreneur, leaving the comfortable, my comfortable desk at Google, I was really, anxious about doing this for the first time. So I really wanted to have entrepreneurs that would be by my side to advise me and give me the right tips when I need them and the right support when I need it. So I really wanted to have investors that have been entrepreneurs before. That was one of the first criteria. And second, I wanted to have people that would be available for me. Being in New York is obviously, the location is important, but if someone is based in Paris and can respond to my emails or introduce me to the press when I need it, or to potential partners, that's fantastic. Finally, I think going back and forth between the West and the East Coast was a really useful tactic to create some sort of excitement around our very early company and raise. I remember the first person who committed and ended up leading around said, "Oh, don't go to SF on Friday. Don't take that plane." And we're like, "Well, we're gonna take it. We bought it with our own money. It was like a lot of money for us now." I was like, "Oh, well, don't take it." We're like, "Well, are you gonna give us the entire sum?" I was like, "No." I was like, "Then we're going." And we ended up we obviously were not shopping around with the term sheet, but we clearly were stronger in SF thanks to this first lead.
You guys are great. Sounds like you guys are great. Cool. Well, we've only got a few minutes left, so let's open it up to audience questions. Does anyone have a question for our panelists? I see some tentative hand raising, this kind of not sure. All right. Well, if you think of something, just start waving your hands or something. I've got more here. So actually, let's do sort of a kind of not quite lightning roundish, which is just what's just one piece of advice that you'd give that we haven't talked about yet. We'll start with Neal this time.
Just focus on, I mentioned a little bit, but focus on storytelling. If you can really tell the story of your business very well and it aligns to the way they're actually operating, there's a wonderful rhythm. You'll have a high conversion rate. You'll speak with a lot of conviction, a lot of sincerity. And I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs who are brilliant at operating not invest the time in building an exceptional deck, telling the story, anticipating questions. And I think it's a useful skill to have in any business, but very much so in capital raising. So focus on the art of storytelling, understand the psychology of that, and you'll make your life a lot easier, not only in the capital raising process, but thereafter.
Yeah, I think the storytelling advice is great. I think Tamal also gave a really good point around, he really tried to focus his round on finding investors who are entrepreneurs. I would extend that into say, as you're getting your company off the ground, I'd spend a lot of time networking with other entrepreneurs rather than just networking with VCs, because I think entrepreneurs just think a little bit differently in general. They'll be able to give you really sharp, candid feedback, and beyond that, there'll be a good support network. Entrepreneurs will tell you which VCs have been easy to work with, which ones have added value. There'll be good references for you, and they're also potentially able to facilitate introductions, which I think most VCs don't really respond well to cold outreach. It's best to sort of get referred in through another entrepreneur or through an entrepreneur that they've previously invested in. So my advice would be really to build a good network of entrepreneurs.
And I would add that I think it's really important to choose your investors as you would choose a business partner. Basically, choose someone you want to spend time with. Sometimes especially when it's your first fundraise, you're desperately hoping that you're not going to be the one who's going to fail at raising money. And when you get your first check, obviously you're very excited, but it's not necessarily the right one. You really want to make sure that the person you're signing this deal with, because it's a deal, hopefully win-win, you want to spend time with this person, because you're going to end up spending time with this person potentially, and that will make everything way richer and nicer and promising.
Awesome. Well, thanks to our panelists. Thank you.